This report, The Economic Case for Language Learning in the Role for Employer Engagement, came out of a series of studies led by the CBI and others, which look consistently at the level of skills in demand by employers. And time and time again they were saying that they're having a real problem finding young people with language skills, ability to speak other modern foreign languages. And we looked as well as a series of academic studies which looked at the earnings of young adults who had language skills, whether it's fluent or it's conversational levels, and find a lot of evidence of wage premiums. Not huge ones, but between 2 and 5%. And you kind of look at the background of those young people, look at their qualifications, and they're doing better than their peers. And we kind of came to this question because in the educational sectors from the 1990s we've seen a real decline in the level of interest for languages amongst young people. If you look at young people opting into GCSEs and looking into A-levels, year on year things have been declining. But more recently, the last 5 years, things have picked up again. But has the interest really picked up? And that's the thing. And so when we looked at this question of kind of the language abilities of the country and the level of interest in languages of young people, the headline really was that the UK has some of the worst language skills in Europe. I think it's us in Ireland who are really struggling. And the question was, does it really matter? English is a lingua franca these days. Does it really matter? Well, we worked with an economist at the University of Bristol, a former Treasury advisor, James Foreman Peck. And what James was able to do was to do some economic modelling, some financial modelling, to see what would happen to the UK if the UK had the average level of language skills across, which we see across Europe. And you can do some quite clever pieces of analysis looking at the amount of exports which are secured by businesses which have higher levels of language skills. You can see relationships, the better the national capacity of countries to speak languages, the more they trade. It's a model which you can then sort of apply, and if you can break it down into kind of nuts and bolts, and you can see the way through various studies that that people looking at exporters who have good languages are more able to adapt their products to native markets. They're able to chase things up if things go wrong there. There's kind of simple things which do make a difference. And what James was able to do was in his modelling was to see, well, if the UK had the same levels of language skills as was found across Europe, what difference would it make? Well, it would make a difference of about £7 billion a year to our gross domestic product. 7 billion, at least 7 billion. And we kind of think, well, okay, how can we really sort of make sense of what should schools and colleges do to try and reverse the decline of interest in languages? And it seemed to me that, and it seemed to us that this is less about, I suppose, coercing young people into taking languages than to giving them reasons to see the value of languages. And that's what studies of language teachers tell us. When they come to those options evenings, one of the key things for them is to try and to demonstrate the relevance of a language to young people. Quite rightly, young people, not many of them are going to become translators or interpreters, but many of them will enter professions where there is a marginal advantage to them if they have a language alongside other skills, whether it's in engineering or manufacturing or exporting industries or journalism, the list goes on and on. And what we found is that if young people are exposed to people they see in the workplace who actually use these languages and can tell, explain, illustrate how they use languages to give them an effective economic advantage, as well as all the other things about being able to make more of your holidays and to interact sort of culturally and so on, that the young people respond in a much more positive way. They're able to change the way they think about things. And this is really important because in an era where young people now are studying languages in England more than they have done for over recent years because of the the English baccalaureate, it's one thing to do that. It's one thing to really get it, to have that motivation, to understand that what's in it for you to be able to do well on this. And we find that this was the sort of thinking which underpinned the launch of Inspiring Languages. One of the lines of Inspiring the Future, well, we find volunteers across the workforce who use multiple languages from Arabic through to Welsh, and they are available to go into schools to talk to young people about how they actually use these languages.